The sun had barely risen above the mesa when the challenge thundered across Dry Creek Valley, as potent as a coming storm. The news spread with the speed of a brush fire. A widower, with a profound sadness in his eyes but determination in his voice, had issued a proclamation that would surely distinguish the genuine from the impostors, the true cowgirls from the pretenders. His name was Carter Sterling, and he was the owner of the most magnificent horse west of the Rio Grande, a black stallion known as Tempest. Standing 17 hands high, the horse possessed eyes like burning coals and a will that had never been subdued. Not by the 20 young women who had tried, nor by the smooth-talking horse wranglers who had traveled from as far as Kansas City with their grand boasts, only to leave with their pride in tatters. But Carter Sterling was not seeking an ordinary rider. He sought a true cowgirl, the type his late wife had been before a fever claimed her life 3 winters ago. He was looking for someone who knew that gaining a horse's trust was a world apart from shattering its spirit, someone who understood that certain forces in this life cannot be conquered, only partnered with. He announced his proposition at the general store on a Tuesday, when the entire town was present to hear. "If you consider yourself a real cowgirl, then prove it on my stallion. Manage to stay on his back for 10 minutes, and I will give you $50 in gold. But if you fail, do not return to my ranch feigning a skill you do not possess." $50 was a fortune, more than most people earned in half a year. It was enough to secure a respectable piece of land, to begin a new life, to tempt a person into believing they could achieve glory through shortcuts. And so, they came in droves. First were the local girls, those who believed they knew horses simply because they had ridden gentle mares to Sunday service. Following them were the drifters, weathered women with stories as tall as the mountains, who were certain their travels had prepared them for any animal on 4 legs. Finally, the professionals arrived, rodeo champions and horse trainers who wore their reputations like a second skin, only to limp away with their failure hanging heavy upon them. Each woman who faced Tempest believed she held the key. Some brought whips, assuming fear would force the stallion submission. Others came with sugar lumps and soft praise, convinced they could charm their way into the saddle. A few even arrived with complicated systems of ropes and leather straps, engineered to demand his compliance. But Tempest had his own definition of cooperation. The first girl lasted a mere 8 seconds. The stallion reared like a dark spectre, then twisted with a ferocity that flung her against the corral fence. The second made it to 15 seconds before Tempest bucked with a calculated precision that was almost mathematical. The third, fourth, and fifth women learned that pride often precedes a painful fall. By the end of that first week, the town doctor had tended to more bruised ribs and damaged egos than he had since the last disastrous cattle drive. Yet still, they came. The news had traveled far beyond Dry Creek Valley, drawing cowgirls from adjacent counties, lured by the gold and the challenge like moths to a flame that would undoubtedly scorch them. Carter Sterling observed it all from his porch, his arms crossed, his face as unreadable as granite. Some townsfolk whispered he was cruel, setting women up for failure for his own twisted amusement. Others speculated he was tempting disaster, claiming no horse was worth the bones being broken in his corral. But Carter knew a secret they did not. He knew his wife had ridden Tempest. Just once, the day before she passed, while the sickness was already consuming her, she had walked to that corral. Somehow, that untamed stallion had allowed her to mount him. For 10 minutes, they had moved as one, as if dancing to a silent melody only they could perceive, circling the enclosure with a grace that felt sacred to behold. When his wife finally dismounted, her eyes shone with something more than fever. "That horse understands things, Carter," she had whispered. "He's waiting for the right woman, someone who truly grasps what it is to be free." Now, 3 years later, he was still searching for that woman. The 20th challenger arrived on a Thursday. She was young, perhaps 22, with sun-streaked hair and a self-assurance that had not yet been tempered by failure. She held on for 12 seconds, an impressive feat, until Tempest introduced a creative flourish to her dismount. The girl landed squarely in the water trough, emerging sputtering and cursing before riding away without a backward glance. The 25th challenger was different, older, more reserved, with hands scarred by genuine work with animals. She approached Tempest with quiet patience, spending an hour just standing by the fence, allowing the stallion to assess her. When she finally entered the corral, a tangible hope filled the air. She lasted nearly 4 minutes before Tempest taught her that patience and partnership were not the same thing. By the time the 25th woman limped from the Sterling ranch, shrouded in defeat, the entire county was abuzz. Some declared Carter's challenge was impossible. Others swore the horse was possessed by a demon. A few wise old-timers mused that perhaps the right woman simply hadn't appeared yet. But Carter Sterling continued to wait, for he had witnessed what was possible. He had seen his wife and that stallion move like two halves of a single soul. He knew that sort of bond could not be coerced, bought, or beaten into being. It had to be earned. It had to be real. And somewhere out there, he held on to the belief that a real cowgirl who would understand was on her way. Miles away, in a line shack filled with the scent of coffee and old leather, a woman named Jackie Morrison sat beside a dwindling fire, listening to the wind spin tales through the chinks in the logs. She had heard the whispers carried on the cattle trails like tumbleweeds, stories of a black stallion no one could ride and a widower's challenge that had broken more women than a harsh winter. Jackie had been alone for so long that solitude felt like a comfortable old coat. She worked the distant pastures for the Double Bar Ranch, checking fences and tending to sick cattle, encountering another person perhaps once a month on her trips to town for supplies. It was honest labor for honest pay, and it suited a woman who had learned that people could inflict wounds far deeper than any animal ever could. But something about the story gnawed at her. Not the gold, although $50 would purchase a great deal of beans and bacon. Not the glory, though she had ridden her share of difficult mounts. It was something more, a whisper in the quiet moments just before sleep, when a person's defenses are down and the truth can find its way in. Perhaps it was how the tale was framed, not as a contest to be won, but as a test to be passed, not as a horse to be dominated, but as a partnership to be forged. Or maybe it was just that Jackie Morrison had been running from something for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to run toward something. She had been a different person once, before the war altered her, before she witnessed the things people could do to one another when they lost their humanity. Before she learned that sometimes, survival meant ceasing to care about anything beyond her next breath. But horses were different. Horses did not lie, betray, or leave you for dead over a disagreement. They were honest in their fear and their trust, their anger and their affection. A horse would show you exactly how it felt about you, and if you were wise enough to pay attention, you could learn something of value. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny messengers to the heavens. Jackie pulled her coat tighter and made a decision that would alter the course of her life. At dawn, she would saddle her mare and ride for Dry Creek Valley. Not for the money, not for the fame, but because sometimes a person has to discover what they are truly made of, especially if the discovery might break them. Because Jackie Morrison suspected she had already been broken for a very long time. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to see if the pieces could be reassembled into a shape that made sense. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows like restless spirits demanding to be heard. Inside the line shack, a lonely cowgirl closed her eyes and dreamed of black stallions and second chances, unaware that the next day would mark the beginning of the ride that would define the rest of her life. The morning arrived, cold and sharp. Jackie Morrison saddled her mare in the grey pre-dawn light, her hands performing the familiar tasks while her mind battled the doubts that grew like shadows. She had packed sparingly, coffee, hardtack, a bedroll behind the cantle, and the quiet resolve of a woman who had finally stopped fleeing from her own reflection. The journey to Dry Creek Valley led her through a landscape that shifted with each mile. Rolling prairies yielded to rugged mesas, which then descended into valleys where cottonwoods clung to creek beds like old friends sharing secrets. Her mare, a dependable sorrel named Copper, navigated the cattle trails and deer paths with the sure-footed confidence of an animal who knew which rocks would hold firm and which would betray her. By midday, the sun had chased away the morning's chill, and Jackie could see the valley unfolding below her, a promised land that could offer either salvation or ruin, depending on what a person brought to it. Smoke curled from distant chimneys, and she could discern the orderly patterns of fenced pastures laid over the land's natural contours. But it was the sound that reached her first, a sound like contained thunder, like fury given form and hooves. Even from a half-mile away, Jackie could hear Tempest's roar echoing off the valley walls, a proclamation of wildness and freedom more eloquent than any poem. Copper's ears twitched forward, and Jackie felt a stirring in her chest she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't excitement, but a sense of recognition, a call from one untamed spirit to another across the expanse. The Sterling Ranch was nestled in a natural basin where spring water collected and the grass grew lush, even in the driest seasons. It was a property that spoke of meticulous planning and relentless effort, where every fence post was set with intention and every structure was positioned to greet the morning sun while shielding against the harsh winter winds. But Jackie's gaze went directly to the corral, where a small crowd had congregated like spectators at a public trial. Another challenger had arrived before her. Jackie dismounted at the edge of the group, leading Copper to a hitching post by the barn. The people gathered were a typical assortment for such an event in cattle country: cowgirls from neighboring ranches, townsfolk with soft hands and strong opinions, and drifters drawn to commotion like flies to honey. They were all watching a woman in ornate chaps and silver-inlaid spurs approach the black stallion with a swagger that broadcasted her belief that no horse was her match. Tempest stood in the center of the corral like a storm made real. His coat was as black as a moonless night, so dark it seemed to drink the light. His neck arched with the pride of a creature that had never submitted to human will. And when he moved, it was with the fluid might of harnessed lightning. This was more than just a horse, Jackie knew. This was a force of nature. The challenger advanced with a rope in one hand, her confidence almost palpable. She was clearly experienced, familiar with all the techniques, and carried a reputation that preceded her. The crowd murmured its approval as she expertly built a loop in her rope. But Tempest was no stranger to ropes. When the loop fell over his neck, the stallion's response was swift and brutal. He rose on his hind legs, his front hooves clawing at the air, then crashed down with a force that made the ground tremble. The rope went slack as he spun, using his momentum to create an opening the challenger failed to anticipate. The woman hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs and the arrogance from her stance. She scrambled away from the stallion's hooves, gasping and covered in dust. For a second, Jackie thought she might have the sense to stay down. But pride makes fools of even the best, and she reached for the rope again. Tempest's patience had run out. What happened next was not graceful. The stallion did not merely buck, he conducted a symphony of controlled power that was a testament to years of dealing with people who thought they could take by force what could only be offered freely. He twisted and spun, reared and bucked, employing every strategy evolution and experience had taught him about dislodging unwanted riders. The challenger lasted maybe 30 seconds before Tempest concluded their interaction. A final, decisive buck sent the woman hurtling toward the fence with enough force to make the rails shudder. She collapsed in a heap of expensive leather and shattered pride, then crawled away like someone trying to remember which way was up. The crowd was already beginning to drift away, grumbling about impossible horses and foolish wagers. It was then that Jackie saw him clearly for the first time. Carter Sterling stood on the ranch house porch as if he were holding a silent dialogue with the sky. He wasn't handsome in the way that would silence a saloon, but he had a quality that commanded your attention. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wood, and his face was etched with lines that spoke of weathering storms without breaking. His clothing was practical, shaped by purpose and strengthened by use. But it was his eyes that captured Jackie. They were the color of a winter sky, a deep gray suggesting depths you could never plumb. They were the eyes of a man who had loved and lost profoundly, who had been broken and had painstakingly rebuilt himself into something stronger. They were eyes that had looked through 25 women's facades and found them all lacking. Now, those eyes were fixed on Jackie, with an appraisal that felt as if it could weigh her very soul in a single glance. She felt utterly exposed under his gaze, as if he could see past her carefully built defenses to the frightened, hollow woman she had been trying to conceal for so long. "Are you here to try your luck with my horse?" he called from the porch, his voice carrying easily across the yard. Jackie touched the brim of her hat, a gesture born from something deeper than mere etiquette. Thinking about it, sir, he observed her for a long moment, noting her worn but cared-for gear, the way she moved with the quiet familiarity of someone who belonged in the world of horses, and the calm confidence that came from years of honest work, not empty boasts. What makes you different from the others? It was a reasonable question, and Jackie found herself genuinely considering it instead of offering a simple reply. What did make her different? She wasn't stronger than some of the women who had failed. She certainly wasn't wealthier or better known. She had no grand reputation, no unique skills that set her apart from any other cowgirl who had learned her trade on the backs of difficult horses. But perhaps that was the answer. "Can't say that I am different, sir," she said at last. "But I'm not here to prove anything to anyone. Not to you, not to that crowd. Not even to myself. I'm just here to see if that horse and I can find some common ground." Something in Carter Sterling's expression shifted, a slight softening that indicated her words had resonated. He descended from the porch with the efficient grace of someone who moved through the world without wasting a single motion. As he drew near, Jackie caught the scent of soap and honest labor. "What's your name, cowgirl?" "Jackie Morrison, sir. I work the line shacks for the Double Bar, north of here at Carter Sterling." He offered his hand, and when Jackie took it, she was struck by the strength in his grip, the calluses that told of real work and its consequences. "You ever been married, Jackie Morrison?" The question took her by surprise, not because it was improper, but because it sliced directly to a part of her she had avoided for years. "No, sir. Came close once. Before the war." She let the sentence hang, hoping he would grasp what she could not bring herself to say. He nodded as if he had anticipated her answer. "My wife could ride that horse. The only person who ever could." "Do you know why?" Jackie looked at Tempest, who was still pacing the corral with the restless energy of a caged storm. "I'd guess it's because she didn't try to break him. That's part of it." Carter's voice held a note of approval. "But it's more than that. She understood that some things in this world are meant to be partnered with, not owned. That true strength is knowing when to yield and when to be firm. That earning trust is not the same as demanding obedience." He was speaking about more than horses now, Jackie realized. He was speaking about the kind of woman his wife had been, the kind of woman he was searching for, the kind of woman who might understand that some challenges are not meant to be conquered, but transcended. "The rules are straightforward," Carter went on. "Stay on his back for 10 minutes without being thrown, and you win the $50. But if you're thrown, you leave and don't come back." "And Jackie Morrison?" "Yes, sir. Don't attempt this unless you're certain. Because once you step into that corral, there's no returning to the person you were before." Jackie looked at the corral, then back at Carter Sterling, and felt something click into place within her chest, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. "Sir, I haven't been sure about much of anything for a long time. But I'm sure about this." He studied her face for another moment, then gave a single nod. "Then you'd better get acquainted with him first. Most women just climb right over that fence. Tempest doesn't care for that kind of presumption." Jackie approached the corral slowly, her boots making soft thuds on the packed earth. The few remaining spectators had drawn closer, sensing that this cowgirl might be unlike the procession of failures they had just witnessed. But Jackie hardly noticed them. Her focus was entirely on the stallion, who watched her with eyes like black diamonds, intelligent, calculating, and completely devoid of fear. "Easy there, partner," Jackie said softly, her voice just for the horse's ears. She didn't climb the fence. Instead, she rested her arms on the rails and simply waited, letting Tempest assess her just as she was assessing him. The stallion approached with the cautious curiosity of a wild creature that had learned to expect the worst from humans but hadn't entirely abandoned the hope of finding something better. He came within 10 feet of the fence and halted, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. The stallion's ears swiveled, reading signals most people never learn to transmit. "You've had your fill of fools, haven't you?" Jackie murmured. "Women who think they can take what you never offered to give. But that's not what this is about, is it?" Tempest took another step closer, then another. Jackie remained perfectly still, not reaching out, not making any demands, just being present in a way that horses comprehend better than any words. Time seemed to stretch and warp, measured not in minutes but in heartbeats and the subtle twitch of muscle beneath a midnight black coat. "My wife used to talk to him just like that," Carter said quietly from behind Jackie. Said horses could hear the truth in a person's voice, even when the person herself had forgotten what truth sounded like. Jackie turned her head slightly but kept her gaze fixed on Tempest. What did your wife do? Before the fever took her, she was a horse trainer. The best in 3 counties. But she never broke anything, if you know what I mean. She had a gift for showing horses what they could become instead of forcing them into something they weren't. His voice was heavy with memory and loss. She said the best horses, the ones truly worth having, choose their riders as much as the riders choose them. Tempest was closer now, near enough for Jackie to see the faint scars on his neck and shoulders, relics of past encounters with women who had tried to take by force what could only be gained through understanding. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and something more, recognition, perhaps, or possibility. He's been waiting, Jackie said, not really speaking to Carter, but not quite talking to herself either. 3 years, he confirmed. 3 years of women thinking they could master him with whips or bribes or fancy equipment. 3 years of him teaching them the difference between submission and partnership. Jackie finally moved, just her hand, extending it palm up toward the fence rail. Tempest's ears flicked forward. After a moment that felt eternal, the stallion stepped close enough to breathe warm air across her fingers. Not quite touching, but close enough to establish that communication was possible. You ready for this? Carter asked. Jackie looked at him over her shoulder, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before, hope, perhaps, or the cautious optimism of someone who has watched too many dreams fail but isn't quite ready to stop dreaming. Sir, I've been ready for something like this my whole life. I just never knew what it was until right now. She climbed the fence then, moving with slow deliberation, giving Tempest every chance to protest or back away. But the stallion held his ground, watching with an intensity that suggested he had learned to read souls through actions rather than words. The corral felt different from the inside, larger, yet more intimate. It was just Jackie and Tempest now, with Carter and the remaining onlookers fading into the background like distant thunder. The stallion moved with fluid grace, circling Jackie at a distance that implied interest without commitment, evaluation without judgment. You know what they say about you, Jackie said conversationally, matching his movement with her own, staying centered but not confrontational. They say you're unrideable, that you've got a demon in you, that you're too proud and too wild for any woman to handle. Tempest snorted, a sound that could have been amusement or disdain. But I don't think that's it at all, Jackie continued, her voice low and steady. I think you're just tired of people who want to own you instead of know you. Tired of being treated like a problem to be solved instead of a partner to be earned. The stallion's ears pricked forward, and he slowed his circling pace. Not stopping, but considering. See, the thing is, I'm not here to break you or tame you or make you into something you're not. Jackie stopped moving, letting Tempest continue his orbit around her. I'm here because I think maybe we've both been carrying something heavy for too long. And maybe, just maybe, we can help each other figure out how to set it down. Tempest completed another circle, then another, each one bringing him fractionally closer to where Jackie stood. The afternoon sun glinted off his black coat, revealing a depth of color that hinted at fine breeding and an indefinable quality that set him apart. My wife said something once, Carter called from the fence, his voice clear in the still air. She said the best horses don't need to be broken because they were never truly wild. They were just waiting for someone who could speak their language. Jackie nodded without shifting her gaze from Tempest. The stallion had ceased his circling and now stood about 15 feet away, head high, ears forward, his entire body conveying attention and possibility. This was the moment, Jackie knew. The moment everything would be decided not by force or skill, but by something far more elusive and valuable, trust. You want to know the truth? Jackie said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm scared. Not of you, but of what happens if this doesn't work. Because I've been empty for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something real. And you're about as real as it gets. Tempest took a deliberate step forward. Then another. His movement was considered, the decision of a creature that had weighed the evidence and reached a verdict that perhaps surprised even him. That's it, Jackie breathed. That's the way. No rush, no pressure. Just two souls figuring out if they can find some common ground. The stallion approached until he was close enough to touch, close enough that Jackie could see her own reflection in his dark eyes. For a long moment, they just stood there, woman and horse, each taking the measure of the other. Then, with the slow certainty of a sunrise, Jackie reached out and laid her palm against Tempest's neck. The stallion didn't flinch. He didn't shy away. He didn't exhibit any of the violent rejections that had become his trademark. Instead, he leaned into the touch, just slightly, just enough to communicate that perhaps, after all this time and all these failures, it was time to try again. Maybe it was time to remember what partnership looked like. The onlookers at the fence had fallen completely silent. Even Carter Sterling seemed to be holding his breath as Jackie slowly, carefully, ran her hand along Tempest's neck and shoulder, learning the language of this magnificent creature. "Well, I'll be," someone whispered from the fence. But Jackie barely heard. Her world had shrunk to this moment, this horse, this possibility that hung between them like morning mist. "You ready?" Jackie asked, the question as much for herself as for Tempest. The stallion's answer was not in words, but in a subtle shift of weight, a relaxation of muscle that suggested acceptance without surrender. Jackie moved to Tempest's left side, her hand never breaking contact. Every motion was deliberate, telegraphed in advance, giving the stallion every chance to object. But Tempest stood firm, his breathing deep and even, his attention fixed on this strange woman who spoke in whispers and asked instead of demanded. The process of mounting took nearly 10 minutes. Not because Jackie was afraid, but because she understood this was about joining something, not conquering it. She gathered the makeshift reins and placed her left foot in the stirrup she had fashioned from a length of rope. Tempest's ears flickered. He could have exploded into motion, could have sent her flying. Instead, he waited with the patience of one who has finally found what he was looking for. When Jackie's weight settled across his back, the world seemed to pause. The stallion stood motionless for a few heartbeats. Then, with a movement so smooth it felt like floating, Tempest took a single step forward. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," someone breathed from the fence, their voice sounding as if from another dimension. Jackie's universe had contracted to the space between Tempest's ears, the rhythm of hooves on packed earth, the feeling of controlled power moving beneath her like captured lightning learning to dance. They walked at first, a slow circuit of the corral, horse and rider finding their balance together. Tempest's gait was unlike anything Jackie had ever known, fluid, organic, like being carried by the wind itself. "How long has it been?" Carter called from the fence, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't place. Jackie glanced at the sun but realized time no longer mattered. She was lost in this moment, in the feeling of partnership with something so wild and magnificent. Then the stallion made his choice. Without warning, he launched into a trot, not a jarring gait, but something smoother, more purposeful. Instead of resisting, Jackie moved with him. "That's it," she whispered. "Show me what you can do." Tempest's response was breathtaking. He transitioned into a canter that felt like riding a storm cloud, each stride devouring the ground. The corral fence became a blur. What mattered was the silent conversation happening between her body and Tempest's, a wordless communication flowing between them. When she shifted her weight, he banked into a turn with the precision of a hawk on a thermal. When she relaxed her grip, he extended his stride, running with the pure joy of something finally allowed to be itself. They were no longer rider and horse, they were something new, a partnership made manifest, trust given form. The minutes flowed by. Jackie lost track of everything but the rhythm beneath her, the feeling of their breathing synchronized, the pure, uncomplicated joy in Tempest's forward-pricked ears. This was not about dominance or submission. This was about two souls recognizing a kindred spirit and choosing to move forward together. 10 minutes. Carter's voice cut through the sound of hooves and wind. Jackie heard his words but didn't comprehend them, too lost in her dialogue with Tempest to recall this had begun as a contest with rules and prizes. But Tempest remembered. The stallion began to slow, not from exhaustion, but with deliberate control. He brought them from canter to trot to walk with the same fluid grace that had defined their ride, finally coming to a halt in the center of the corral where they had started. The silence that followed was immense. Jackie could hear her own heart, feel Tempest's breathing return to normal beneath her, and sense the weight of eyes watching from the fence. But the only thing that felt real was the warmth of the horse, the trust that had been offered and accepted, and the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted in them both. "I'll be damned," someone finally uttered from the crowd, breaking the spell. Jackie dismounted slowly, her legs unsteady not from fear, but from the aftershocks of a transcendent experience. Tempest turned his head to watch her, and their eyes met in a look of profound, unspoken understanding. 15 minutes, Carter said, his voice clear as he stepped into the corral. "You rode him for 15 minutes, Jackie looked at him, still dazed. "The challenge was 10 minutes, sir, the challenge was 10 minutes without being thrown," he corrected, approaching them. "You weren't thrown. You could have ridden him all afternoon." He ran his hand along Tempest's neck, a gesture of congratulation and relief. The stallion nickered softly at his touch, a sound of contentment Jackie had never heard before. "He remembers," Carter said softly. "He remembers what it feels like to carry someone who understands." Jackie watched the interaction between man and horse, seeing echoes of the partnership she had just felt. Carter Sterling hadn't just been looking for a rider, he was searching for something lost. "Your wife," Jackie said quietly. "She rode like that?" Carter's smile was soft and sad. "She rode exactly like that. Like she was born to it, and he was born to carry her." He looked at Jackie with eyes that held depths she was only now beginning to fathom. "I haven't seen anything like it since the day she died." The crowd at the fence was dispersing, the spectacle complete. But Jackie's attention was fixed on Carter. On the way he looked at her with something that might have been recognition or gratitude, or the start of something neither was ready to name. "The money," he said, reaching into his pocket. $50, as promised." Jackie looked at the gold coins in his palm, then back at his face. The money felt utterly irrelevant. "Keep it," she said. This wasn't about the money. Carter's eyebrows rose. Then what was it about? Jackie looked at Tempest, who stood between them like a bridge. "I think it was about finding something I didn't know I was looking for." "And what was that?" She met his eyes, seeing the same recognition she felt stirring in her own chest. "Home, maybe. Or at least the possibility of it." Carter Sterling had been alone for 3 years. 3 years of managing a ranch by himself, of proving he could survive without a wife's help. But surviving was not the same as living, and watching Jackie Morrison ride his wife's horse had reminded him of that difference. "You have somewhere you need to be?" he asked, the question casual but heavy with possibility. Jackie looked around the ranch, at the well-kept buildings and the sense of order that spoke of someone who built things to last. Then she looked back at Carter, seeing in his face the same quiet strength she'd felt in Tempest. "No, sir," she said finally. "Can't say that I do the double bar. They'll miss you." Jackie thought of her line shack, of the solitude that had been both prison and refuge. "They'll find someone else," she said. "Always do." Carter nodded. "I could use a hand around here. Running a spread this size is more than one person should handle. The pay is fair, and there's a cabin by the north pasture that needs someone in it." He paused, studying her. "Of course, there's one condition." "What's that?" "Tempest comes with the job. He needs someone who understands him. Someone who can work with him. Think you might be interested in that kind of partnership?" Jackie looked at the stallion, who had moved closer and now stood with his head lowered, his breath warm on her shoulder. The horse felt like an anchor in a world that had been unsteady for too long. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice firm with a certainty she hadn't felt in years. "I believe I might be very interested in that." Carter's smile was like a sunrise. "Then welcome to the Sterling Ranch, Jackie Morrison. I have a feeling this is the beginning of something good." As if in agreement, Tempest lifted his head and whinnied, the sound echoing across the valley like a promise. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the hope stirring in Jackie's chest. She had come seeking a challenge and had found a place where her skills were needed, her presence welcomed, and her future was suddenly bright. Most importantly, she had found what every real cowgirl spends her life searching for. She had found home. The seasons turned, and by the time spring returned to Dry Creek Valley, Jackie Morrison was as much a part of the Sterling Ranch as the Cottonwoods by the creek. She had settled into the cabin by the north pasture, a sturdy little house that seemed to have been waiting for her. Her work was not just the familiar rhythm of ranch life, but the growing partnership with the horse that had changed everything. Tempest was more than a mount, he was a confidant, a translator of her intentions. Carter watched this partnership flourish, and he watched Jackie herself change. The haunted look left her eyes, replaced by a quiet joy that had been buried for too long. But it was the moments between the work that revealed what was truly growing. The shared coffee on his porch in the evenings, the conversations that drifted from cattle prices to dreams and losses, and the careful hope that the future might be different from the past. "You know," Carter said one evening as they watched the sunset, "I never properly thanked you." Jackie looked at him, puzzled. "For what?" "For proving me right," he said with a soft smile. "For 3 years, I told everyone Tempest wasn't unrideable, just waiting for the right person. Most people thought I was a fool. And now, they see what I always knew was possible." He paused, his gaze on Tempest in the pasture. "Sometimes the most worthwhile things in life are the ones you have to wait for." There was a weight to his words that suggested he wasn't just talking about horses. "Carter," Jackie said quietly, turning to face him. "I need you to know something. I came here thinking I was just a woman looking to prove herself. But what I found..." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "What I found was a place where I could remember who I used to be, before the war, before all the running." Carter reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You found yourself," he said simply. "Same as Tempest did when you showed him what partnership could be." "I found more than that." Jackie's voice was thick with emotion. "I found you." The kiss that followed was as inevitable as the sunrise, gentle and full of the promise that broken places can heal stronger than before. When they parted, stars were appearing overhead. "Marry me," she said, the words coming from a place deeper than thought. "I know it's sudden, and I don't have much to offer except a cowgirl's wages and a heart that's finally learned how to hope." But Carter silenced her with another kiss, fierce and joyful. "Yes," he whispered against her lips. "Yes, Jackie Morrison. Yes to all of it." Their wedding was a simple ceremony 6 months later, on an October morning when the cottonwoods had turned to gold. As Jackie and Carter spoke their vows on the front porch, Tempest approached the fence and stood watching, his magnificent head held high. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tempest reared once in a joyful celebration that made everyone laugh and Carter brush a happy tear from his eye. The years that followed were filled with quiet contentment. Together, they built the Sterling Ranch into a place known for quality horses, with Tempest as the foundation of their breeding line. Jackie trained each of his offspring with the same patience and understanding that had won their father's trust. Perhaps the greatest testament to what they built came 5 years after their wedding, when a young cowboy rode into the yard, leading a limping horse, desperation etched on his face. "Name's Tom Bradley," he said, hat in hand. "I heard tell you folks might have work for someone who's better with horses than with people." Jackie and Carter exchanged a look filled with 5 years of shared history, each remembering another lost soul who had ridden into their lives searching for something they couldn't name. "Well, Tom Bradley," Carter said with a smile full of hard-won wisdom, "I think we might just have exactly what you're looking for." And as the sun set over Dry Creek Valley, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Jackie Morrison stood on her porch with her husband beside her and watched a new story begin. Somewhere in the pasture, Tempest called out once, a sound that seemed to say some challenges aren't meant to break a person, but to remake them. In the West, they said only the strong survived. But Jackie Morrison had learned a different truth. Sometimes, it wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes, it was just about being real.